Hello again. I want to talk a little today about extremism, or rather what passes these days for extremism. Being patriotic, of course, can count for extremism today. Terrorism too seems to embrace a lot of activities which were once perfectly lawful. Definitions about what constitute extremism and terrorism have become more elastic so that those in authority can pretend that ordinary law-abiding white people are as much a threat to life and limb as fanatical Islamists. 40 or 50 years ago, almost all the terrorism in the United Kingdom was carried out by Irish people. This, of course, tells us nothing about Irish people per se. It rather says something about the cause for which men and women at that time were prepared to fire guns and plant bombs. Today, almost all terrorism in Britain is carried out by Muslims. Again, this tells us nothing at all about Muslims or Islam, but rather it gives us an insight into the particular cause for which people are willing to plant bombs, stab people or run over pedestrians. These acts are conducted by Islamists, people who believe that it is not enough to see Islam as a religious faith, but that it should also be the political system and government of all countries. These people are enemies of democracy, which they see as a corrupt and atheist invention of the West. Only a very tiny proportion of Muslims are, of course, Islamists. You really can't generalise about Muslims based upon the activities of a few crazed Islamists. Because the British government worries that the fact that nearly all terrorism in this country is by Muslims and that this may lead to irrational hatred of Islam as a religion, they have over the last few years devised a counterfactual narrative in which terrorism is just as likely to be carried out by white English nationalists as it is to be the work of Muslims. They're having their work cut out with this enterprise because, of course, apart from the odd crank like the fellow who ran somebody down outside Finsbury Park Mosque a couple of years ago, there are no right-wing terrorists in Britain. In the description to this video, I'll give a link to a news item which gives a brilliant example of the kind of terrorist whom the police are now being urged to crack down on. The headline reads, I have my paper here, UK's youngest terrorist ran Nazi cell from cottage. Scary stuff. Now, I'm notoriously fussy and pedantic about language and particularly the meaning of words. But to me, a terrorist is somebody who carries out acts of terrorism. Let's just check. The Oxford English says terrorist, a person who uses terrorism in the pursuit of political aims. Yep, that's pretty much what I thought. Okay, what terrorism has this teenager been found guilty of? The one who's currently facing prison, by the way. Right, let's have a look and see what it says. He's posted things praising certain right-wing killers, a fellow in New Zealand that killed people in a mosque, and the Norwegian guy who shot a load of people. When arrested, the Cornish-based teenager told police he had made homophobic and anti-Semitic posts online to look cool. Well, people post anti-Semitic remarks on this very channel all the time. I mean, that may be irritating, it certainly irritates me, but I could hardly call it terrorism. It's just absurd. The court found a Nazi flag. Well, I've got a few bits and pieces of Nazi memorabilia, badges, bits and pieces of army stuff. That's not actually terrorism to possess items that were used by the Nazis during the 1930s and 40s. Painted on the garden shed were the numbers 14, which stands for the 14 words, "We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children," and 88, which refers to HH, or Heil Hitler, if we know this. 1488 is a well-recognised Nazi slogan and symbol. It may well be. Asked whether he had racist or homophobic views, he said he just said so to look cool. But I mean, being homophobic, just saying that you don't approve homosexuality isn't terrorism either. I'm half-minded to go and paint 1488 on the door to my garden shed. I've never heard anything like it in my life. I'm surprised at the Daily Telegraph for catering to this foolishness. In fact, this boy has done things which any number of teenagers have in the past. He's mixed with some unsavoury characters and repeated silly propaganda. None of this should be against the law. And the fact that he is now possibly facing a prison sentence for terrorism is an absolute scandal. The thumbnail to this video shows another attempt to whip up the fear of right-wing extremism. It shows a leaflet handed out to officers and NCOs in the British Army. It was first printed and distributed in 2017. Here are the ways to spot right-wing extremists in the barrack room. Very important. The first warning sign is, of course, somebody describing himself as a patriot. Call me old-fashioned, but I rather hope that the soldiers charged with defending this realm are patriotic and will not hesitate to say so. Referring to political correctness as a left-wing plot is also something to watch out for. This is frankly weird because political correctness is a left-wing plot. I mean, is this supposed to be a secret, or are we just meant not to mention the fact openly? Making inaccurate generalisations about the government is also the sort of thing to keep an eye out for. Dear me, I'd better stop describing Johnson and his cronies as a bunch of wide boys and spivs who I wouldn't trust to look after my house for the weekend. That might come across like an inaccurate generalisation about the government. Mind you, the Guardian often indulges in that sort of inaccurate generalisation about the government, so I suppose they're guilty of terrorism in that sense as well. I have to admit that I have in the past involved colleagues in closed social media groups as well, often to do with home education. I remember a time when the military police had more important things to do with their time than hunt out patriotic squaddies. But then I suppose I'm a bit behind the times. I can understand there might be a concern if somebody was breaking into the armoury and passing ammunition and weapons to a militia group, but there's no mention of that sort of action. This is all about what people are thinking and saying. Both the things in this watch list and also the activities of the UK's youngest terrorist were once quite lawful. In their efforts to prevent anybody from thinking that Islamist terrorists are a genuine threat to the public, the present government is determined to pretend that ordinary people are terrorists if they hold views which run counter to the received liberal viewpoint. This is a very dangerous trend.